for today. Our webinar for today is part 3 in our series with the Sustainable Human and Environmental Systems, or SHES Roundtable. Today's program focuses on program administration and assessment. On behalf of the SHES Roundtable, Michael Reiter and Rick Smardon will be handling commentary. As background, the SHES Roundtable, which first met in 2009, represents an ongoing effort by academics, program directors, administrators, environmental agency personnel, and practitioners to produce a living set of consensus-based recommendations concerning pedagogical and administrative aspects of interdisciplinary and higher order sustainability education. The Roundtable's vision is the emergence of societies that facilitate, enhance, and sustain indefinitely, in that facilitated or enhanced state, the well-being of human individuals, their communities, and their environments, while its pedagogical goal is to empower learners to contribute to the realization of that vision. As I said, this webinar is part 3 of a 3-part series. This seminar will present administrative examples as well as suggestions for moving existing programs toward designs supportive of a SHES-style approach to sustainability education. For those of you who missed the first 2 installments of this webinar series, not to worry, they're both posted on the SCC website. The links to the YouTube video recordings are available on the website. Part 1 of the series, the month before last, focused on the background of the SHES Roundtable, including the forces that brought it together and informed its work, and the fundamentals of the SHES view of the academic field, including the SHES vision, mission, and goal. Last month, Part 2 focused on the pedagogy of the SHES approach to sustainability education, including the general outlines of the approach, specific pedagogical strategies that can be used to implement it in the classroom, and an example of a course that illustrates its use. Today, the subject matter is program administration and assessment, and for that topic, we're delighted to have Michael Reiter, who is professor and chair of the Department of Integrated Environmental Science at Bethune-Cookman University. He has a BS in biology and an MS in biology and a PhD in environmental sciences. His primary research is in integrated ecosystem management, focusing on the development and application of interdisciplinary stakeholder-based methods for addressing wicked environmental problems from a systems perspective. Dr. Reiter is also a principal developer of the combined ecological societal systems modeling and the integrated assessment and ecosystem management protocol, a combination that meets the need for a truly integrated ecosystem management method. He is a past president and counselor for the Interdisciplinary Environmental Association. Michael has over 50 refereed publications in several different fields of study, and he's received multiple university and national awards for his teaching and research. His goal is to emphasize the importance of making scientifically informed, broadly based decisions concerning present and future environmental sustainability concerns, and to help ensure that such broadly trained individuals exist in the near future. Rick Smardon is the State University of New York Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus in the Department of Environmental Studies at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. He has a PhD in environmental planning and a master's in landscape architecture, a bachelor's in environmental design. He has written or edited 6 books, and a 7th book with members of the SHES Roundtable is the new book, Education for Sustainable Human and Environmental Systems, published by CRC Routledge. The link for more information on the SHES book is available on the SCC website under the announcement for this webinar. Rick's major areas of expertise include landscape assessment and management, wetland assessment and mitigation, environmental management and citizen participation, law and aesthetics, and energy sustainability planning implementation. Also credited in this webinar, though not with us this afternoon, is Steve Mulkey. Steve is an environmental scientist dedicated to developing undergraduate and graduate programming to build society's capacity for environmental mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Steve was the president of Unity College in Unity, Maine from 2011 through 2015. His leadership and forward-looking vision resulted in Unity being the first college in the U.S. to divest its endowment from the top 200 fossil fuel companies and the first college in the U.S. to adopt sustainability science as the framework for all academic programming. Steve earned his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, and he has spent over 20 years as a forest ecologist affiliated with the Smithsonian. Steve Mulkey has served as tenured faculty at 3 research-intensive public universities and as a program officer at NSF. And Steve did contribute greatly to the sections of the new SHES book that are being presented today by Mike and Rick. With that, I've already shifted the presenter role over to Rick. His slides are up and ready to go. Once again, for those who have joined us, please mute your lines and use the chat box to post questions and comments, and I will scan them and tee up questions for Mike and Rick as we go. You can post throughout the presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Rick.
Thanks, Ira, and good afternoon to everyone to this webinar number 3 in the SHES Program Administration and Assessment. I'd just like to give a little bit of credit. Stephanie Furman, now with Arizona State University, played a key role on the chapter on faculty support. And of course, Stephen Mulkey was key to Chapter 16 in looking at sustainability across the curriculum of the whole university. So I just want to get that out there in terms of credit to those folks. And as Ira just said, the previous 2 parts are available on the Consortium website. And I don't want to say any more about that except they're there. And if you want to go back and review, feel free to do so. But before we get too far with the administrative side, I'd just like to go back and do sort of a big picture overview. These slides are from Stephen Mulkey, just so you know. And the first thing is we need to build a sustainability, and the mission of higher ed is to really help us do that. And the issue is in academia, a lot of times, sometimes we're not that consistent with the real world. And the problem is when we're looking at sustainability, we need to have an approach that coincides with the real world problems we have with sustainability. Some of our slides aren't coming out here. I don't know if this is working or not. Okay. So the other thing is the sustainability science. The idea here is that we need to have things that converge in terms of the different disciplines. So this is also very critical and deal with concrete solutions to sustainability. And also deal with the issue of complexity. This was something that was brought up before with part 2 of our presentation webinar as well. So here's the issue of convergence. We see on the left-hand side the interdisciplinary nature of different fields, where really we want to get towards a disciplinary convergence, bringing a lot of these issues and areas together. And again, dealing with complex problems and deep integration across the disciplines. This slide basically talking about different kinds of literacy. This is always an issue here. I don't think some of my slides are coming out, but anyhow, we will continue on. So dealing with sustainability, as Iris said, the consortium deals a lot with curriculum and that side, but we also have to deal with the operation of the university as well as administration and finance. So we're coming together. And this particular program, we're going to cover program evaluation and assessment, supporting SHES faculty members, supporting curriculum and program design, model structures for program support, and then we'll have some final thoughts on the SHES approach in general. So when we first put together the book and talked to the publisher at Rutledge, the one thing they said to us was, we really want you to focus on the administration support of this. A lot of people have written about how you develop sustainability programs. There's very few have written in terms of the detail of how you structure and support these programs. So on we go. So program evaluation and assessment, we have a number of challenges and barriers. One of these challenges is no standardized program for accreditation. When this Council of Environmental Deans and Directors did their review of environmental studies and sciences programs across the country, they developed 3 different models, and programs were all over the place, so that assessment became very, very difficult if we want to go toward a standardized assessment program. The other issue, I think, in terms of challenges and barriers is adequate preparation. A lot of us that teach in environmental studies or environmental science and the related disciplines really need to be able to prepare students adequately when they go out into the world. And so this is one thing that we've been trying to keep track of in terms of what students do, what do they really need to be able to be effective when they go out into the world and deal with sustainability issues. The other challenge and barrier is the very slow progress that has been made in terms of sustainability program implementation. Some schools have done very well, and others have lagged behind for various reasons. So when we look for the need for assessment, one of the needs is sustainability policy development and evaluation. An example is recently SUNY, College of Environmental Science and Forestry, went through a Middle States accreditation review, and they did an umbrella review using sustainability for the whole evaluation rubric for the whole institution. This really helps you sort of set a standard in terms of what your institution does and how you do it, as well as increase awareness and support for sustainability, and also strengthen transparency and responsibility. So one of the things when we went through the college-wide review for sustainability or accreditation was that the administrators oftentimes have a different idea of what that means versus the faculty. So going through some of this kind of process helps get on the same page. The other thing that helps is creating benchmarks. So if you know that you have certain assessment data, you could compare one program to another or one institution to another, sort of a positive competition. And finally, standardized assessment can lead to institutional learning. So if we look at what's on the ASHE scoreboard, the American Association for Sustainability or Higher Education, or Sustainability Consortium here that Ira runs, if we have similar rubrics, we can sort of compare and build knowledge about sustainability education. Okay, there are different kinds of assessment rubrics or systems that are out there. When we put the book together, we looked around the world at what other folks were doing in terms of assessment. One of these, an example, is the Global University Network and Innovation, which was really started through the United Nations, mainly in Europe and other places, maybe not so much in the US, but again, very generalized assessment looking at the whole institution. So if you look at the ASHE STAR system, right, that looks at institutional operation besides curriculum and as well as student learning outcomes. So again, a whole sort of institutional-wide assessment. And if you look at the environmental management systems and self-assessment, or GEMI, these are really built for industry or private firms. They could be used in a university context, but all these systems really don't specifically focus on measurable sustainability program outcomes. So we started looking again. And so program assessment tools, there are a number of these that we looked at internationally. There's a three-dimensional university rating system by Luckman. Very simple system, but again, only looked at certain parameters for assessment. Sustainability tool for auditing in university curricula and higher education, or STAUNCH, developed by Lozano, has been implemented in 3 or 4 institutions, both in the US and in Europe. Pretty good tool. And then another tool, other tools have been developed for learning outcomes and competencies in Europe by Roda, De Haan, Lambrecht, and Slurs. And these come a little bit closer to the kinds of assessment tools that we looked at for the SHES approach. So in the SHES program assessment, we, in 2 or 3 years, came up with a number of attributes, including holistic thinking, systems thinking, superdisciplinary thinking, complexity thinking, temporal thinking, collaboration, and social learning. So I know you cannot see this exactly, but I want to go through just a few of these as a kind of an example. So if we look at the left-hand column, we can see the categories. And if we look at superdisciplinary thinking, if there's no evidence of that, that means a student cannot describe or explain phenomena without using disciplinary theories and methods. If there's a little bit of evidence, they're beginning to understand that, they can describe or explain simple phenomena without using disciplinary-based theories or methods. If they're really developing this in terms of an outcome, then they can describe and explain simple phenomena without use of discipline-based theories and methods. And if they're really accomplished, they can distinguish between more or less complex systems and systematic interactions. So if we bounce down one row and go to complexity thinking, if there's no evidence, the student cannot distinguish between more or less complex systems. If there's a little bit of evidence, they can distinguish between some complex systems or systematic interactions. If they're really developing competency, they can distinguish between more or less complex systems and systematic interactions qualitatively or quantitatively. And finally, if they're accomplished, they can distinguish between more or less complex systems and systematic interactions, both qualitatively and quantitatively. This, if you go back to the second webinar that we had, we go through this in much, much more detail in terms of the actual course content to develop complexity thinking. Finally, one more example. If we go down a little bit to diversity thinking, the student cannot recognize different stakeholder perspectives or values. When they're beginning to get this, they can recognize some different stakeholder perspective or values. And when they're developing the competency, they can recognize different stakeholder perspectives, values, and claims. And finally, if they're accomplished, they can recognize different stakeholder perspectives and values and the need to resolve conflicting claims that arise from them. So again, this matrix was developed over 2 or 3 years of very intensive discussion to get to this point. So the next piece is basically supporting SHES faculty. I've been involved in review of maybe 15 different programs, environmental studies and environmental science programs across the country as an external reviewer. And you learn a lot when you look at different institutions and the things that they have gone through. So For faculty, there's challenges for both large and small institutions. Just because you're a large institution and you theoretically have a lot of resources does not mean that things are going to be easy for you in supporting SHES faculty. And smaller institutions sometimes are more flexible in terms of dealing with these issues. There's a real challenge sometimes recruiting faculty. If you're really trying to recruit a plural disciplinary type faculty member, it's really hard sometimes to figure out the skills and where you go to find these, or the kinds of institutions where people are trained. So it takes a lot in terms of planning and implementation and actually running the search to be effective. Mentoring and support, again, it's a challenge because sometimes an individual faculty member may need multiple mentors with maybe different kinds of backgrounds versus a single mentor. And just understanding how they teach and how they work and how they do research. The promotion and tenure considerations, I'll get to these in a minute, in terms of assessing SHES scholarship, and this can sometimes be a real challenge. And finally, the institution itself needs to adjust in terms of promotion criteria, budgets, and decision-making for SHES types of faculty. So just as a kind of example of the kinds of things that are good to support SHES faculty, it's good when you have cross-fertilization. Things like professional development funding, travel support, so they can develop new directions and connections. Team collaboration. We realize in many cases, many institutions really can't afford to do much team teaching. And then the question is, if they do team teaching, how do you evaluate that when you have multiple instructors? But the idea is that if we can teach across natural and social sciences with humanities, networking for joint SHES research, infrastructure support, especially for multiple author publications, these are all very supportive kinds of activities. Also, field creation, what we mean by that is creation of new centers and institutes which formalize and recognize the faculty contributions and are cross-departmental. Different institutions have done this in different ways. Arizona State University created a whole new school of sustainability. That's one way to do it. Problem orientation. Focus again on problems and involve outside the university, practitioners, stakeholders, agencies to become involved in what we call the co-production of these kinds of approaches. So again, in terms of administrative support, you can run from modest to intermediate to significant. So just looking at administration, maybe there's a committee that works with faculty. In the intermediate level, maybe there's a SHES program and a center. And at the significant level, we have interdisciplinary SHES department with budgetary authority, and SHES within a college, university, strategic plan, or in the mission statement. So this shifts down a little bit to faculty and scholarship. Maybe modest as an affiliated SHES faculty hired in disciplinary departments. Intermediate, SHES hires term faculty members in multi-small grants program. And finally, significant, we have tenure track hires in interdisciplinary SHES department, tenure promotion criteria, and SHES research programs. So these are kind of support programs that are really, really good to have for SHES types of faculty. So finally, we come to the real fun part. I've been involved in a number of promotion and tenure situations with SHES types of faculty in the environmental studies department. So the question is, how many letters do you get from external evaluators, and how do you find out who these evaluators are? In many cases, it's kind of a challenge. I had one faculty member that he worked with everybody. I couldn't find anybody that he hadn't worked with to find a letter. How do you give publication credit for multi-authored types of peer-reviewed publications? There are oftentimes fewer honors opportunities for SHES types of faculties because it's a new field. Sustainability is a new area. It's not a traditional area, so maybe there aren't as many awards out there that recognize that kind of work. Also, grant support. Sometimes they're not the grant agencies or programs. An exception is maybe the National Science Foundation Sustainability or SEAS programs. These really support multiple institutions looking at sustainability problems. There also is the issue of non-traditional teaching. You know, again, how do we deal with the co-teaching area? How do we provide credit and acknowledgement for that? There are often advising issues. SHES faculty may deal with many different kinds of students with many kinds of different needs. It's like any advising, but maybe it's a little bit more complicated for SHES faculty. National, international committees and leadership, again, there may be fewer opportunities, but this, of course, is changing as we see. And finally, on-campus participation. If there's a sustainability program at your college or institution, SHES faculty are expected to take the lead or play a major role. So there's that extra expectation sometimes of on-campus participation in whatever program or college that you are in. So these are some of the issues with both assessment and faculty support. And now we need to hand it over to Mike, dealing with supporting curriculum and program design.
Thank you very much, Rick, and thank you everyone for tuning in to us today. Since we have the time and we had some issues with those initial slides, I've gone and pulled those forward to see if we can't deal with those more properly, because in essence it gives the foundation of why anyone would want to bother to go through all of this effort to begin with. And what we have is building a sustainable civilization. We believe this should be a mission of higher education, particularly interdisciplinary education that focuses on environmental issues. That in essence, if everything we do is stuck within the walls and doesn't move beyond it, we really aren't putting what we're trying to teach into practice. So the way, a quote here from Wickman and Rockström, the way we have structured research and organized universities, right now it's not consistent with how reality works. The sciences and the universities are stuck in a disciplinary status quo they have been in for centuries. We're finally starting to see some breakout within that box that so many institutions have been in for so long. But that breakout is not proceeding at the rate of the new issues that we have to address. So if you're familiar with Paul Gilding and the Great Disruption, we can look at the mission of higher education during this period. Paul Gilding argues that it's a defining era for our species and for higher education, and that it is urgent that we produce practitioners that are able to integrate knowledge from multiple disciplines and understand trade-offs among solutions, because it is going to be absolutely necessary in order to address the wicked types of issues that we have facing us in the realm of sustainability, that we are able to do these things. And therefore we must turn out students who are comfortable navigating this type of a universe. And in fact, there is an argument to be made that higher education has an ethical obligation to lead the development of the foundation for a sustainable civilization. And we can only do that if we are teaching in a way that would allow our students to be able to begin to address these things functionally. So, definitions for sustainability science relate to this. Education and research that seeks to understand the complexity of the interactions among all these different facets in order to propose concrete solutions. That's in essence what the Roundtable has been trying to build a pedagogy toward, is accomplishing this type of task. So mitigation, adaptation, resilience understanding issues, understanding their causes, understanding potential ways to address them, and then try to foster systems that have some resilience against future changes. These are all things that have been brought out through a number of agencies, large institutions, and environmentally oriented programs, small and large. This is what we're trying to accomplish. So, in essence, what we would like to do is take traditional interdisciplinary approaches and converge them. Not just pay attention to the overlaps, but pay attention to the functional interactions that occur necessarily in the application of these particular disciplinary perspectives. This is what we're hoping to deal with. So we're interested in a synthetic framework. And that synthetic framework should be focused on issues that we need to address. And through the first and second webinars, we've been trying to lay out the argument for that, the principles behind it, and ways that you can begin to teach these concepts and ideas within the classroom. So our definition of literacy is a relatively broad one. Yes, there's a liberal arts foundation, written, verbal, media, quantitative. There's a normative aspect to it. There's ethical and political context, which must be understood. And in essence, a set of informational literacy that's going to be essential to support that critical thinking. To get to the disciplinary convergence, the problem-based teaching and learning is really there to be helpful in giving a focus to the integration of these different disciplines. And we would argue that no student should be moving forward without meeting some minimum standard for dealing with this, because every single individual is going to have to deal with this in the future. So there are administration and finance aspects of these particular issues and approaches. There are operations aspects of them, and there are academic and co-curricular aspects of them. And if you take a look at what's been developing over time, it seems that the academic and co-curricular aspects are the ones that seem to have the most inertia tied to them, or that we're trying to overcome. So putting all that together then, if you're going to support a curriculum and a program designed for doing this, you kind of have to know where you are. There have been a number of surveys about the different types of environmental and sustainability programs that exist. There was a major SED census, for example, which went through hundreds of programs, and in essence, sort of, they ended up grouping out into three different types. There's the environmental scientist type, which tend to be technologist, science, and research oriented. In these programs, disciplinary depth tends to be emphasized, and interestingly enough, there tends to be a universal core associated with it. Whereas the environmental problem solver types of programs have a professional problem solving orientation, sort of a practitioner point of view. The breadth emphasis tends to be on the interdisciplinary, and they tend to have relatively flexible cores. Then there's the environmental citizen group, the advocate group, which tends to be liberal arts and advocacy oriented, not necessarily professional. It can be non-professional. The breadth emphasis in these programs tends to be in the socio-political arenas, and they also tend to have a flexible core. Now, they have a common identity in that they all are trying to approach sustainability, but if you think about those different types of designs, they're going to lead to different approaches. So if you're looking to move toward a SHES approach, it's helpful to know what types of programs you have available. Where are you starting from? Secondly, Rick started to talk about the issues of resource-rich versus resource-constrained institutions, relatively speaking. Smaller institutions do, from the data, tend to have some limitations. They tend to have a lack of faculty trained in sustainability types of education. They often don't have many dedicated faculty beyond a program director. The institutional support is often lacking, and they often have a hard time accessing the faculty and other units that are needed for the necessary coursework. However, they do tend to be able to generate excitement among the faculty in delivering new sustainability-related courses and experiences interdisciplinarily. And that makes some sense. If you are working in a small institution, you typically don't have the luxury of teaching only a small handful of courses, only close to what your dissertation topic was. And so the smaller institutions, while they have these limitations, they often have more of an interest in pulling things together. Whereas the larger institutions tend to have very strong departmental structures. They're often unidisciplinary or closely so, and that can impede the development of trans and interdisciplinary sustainability programs, let alone the superdisciplinary programs envisioned by our approach. Now, all of these limitations can be overcome by determined individuals and the right type of administrative support. There are some very broad programs at some very large institutions. There are some very small institutions that are able to work very well at a relatively higher order level. The question is, how do you get there from wherever you are? So, pathways forward for SHES program development pretty much depend on where you're starting. Where's the primary disciplinarity of the courses that are offered? The SHES Roundtable has laid out this scheme. Unidisciplinary prefix meaning one, single, or alone. Traditional courses, again, or disciplines, history, geology. It is possible to have multidisciplinary programs where there are a number of different disciplines that are put together in order to try and address topics. And it's also possible to have things from more than one discipline and link them together in order to look at a topic. We'll look at it this way, then we'll look at it that way, we'll look at it that way. These all exist, but the SHES Roundtable does not believe that these are going to get us to the approach necessary to address current sustainability issues. Better is a pluridisciplinary approach where you focus on the intersections. You focus on where particular disciplines overlap as it pertains to some particular concept or topic. It's not particularly difficult to get from one of the first three to a pluridisciplinary approach, and it can often be done with faculty members who are themselves relatively disciplinarily trained. Team teaching courses for people that get along with each other can do this relatively well. While the SHES Roundtable doesn't think that's quite going to get us to where we need to go, it is a step forward and something that can be done relatively simply without a whole lot of time or effort or investment in resources. Much closer to what we're trying to get to are the interdisciplinary approaches, where the barriers between disciplines start to break down as you take a look at things, and you're interested in those interactions and the feedbacks among these different perspectives while looking at something from a holistic perspective. What would be ideal, what would be wonderful, is a supradisciplinary approach where you're always looking at the whole. You may look at it with less complexity or more complexity as time goes on, but you are always looking at the whole, a systems orientation to what you're doing. The problem is that not a lot of people are trained in that particular approach, that particular perspective. So if you want to move toward SHES style education, the interdisciplinary approach may be a functional option for you. And for programs that don't have a lot of opportunity for bringing in new faculty or designing lots of new programs, the interdisciplinary approach could be the best option for the time being. Program design models, there are a number of program design models. If you look at the courses over the 4 years or however many years of the program, the standard triangle and inverted triangle program designs are typically associated with more disciplinarily oriented programs. You may start with relatively general introductory courses, and then as you move on in the program, you get more and more focused, more and more intense within a particular subject or subsection of that subject. In the inverted triangle approach, you start with very detailed concepts that are appropriate for whatever your field, and then you show how you can utilize these things in a number of different contexts applied to a number of different issues. These, once again, they exist quite a bit. The SHES Roundtable believes that you could do a little better in trying to design something that will work well for trying to get to these broader sustainability issues in a SHES approach. The diamond design, where you have a very narrow disciplinary base when you start, then you broaden, and in the middle of the program you start to give students more perspectives as to how this discipline feeds into other things, and then every student ends up picking some aspect in it that they want to focus on. Or the alternative, the hourglass, where the initial courses show you a broad perspective of the discipline, and then as you get into the middle of the course, you learn tasks, you learn skills, you learn specific types of tools that you can utilize, and then the end of the program shows you how you can apply those once again back in the broader world. Now, it would be wonderful if you could set up an extensional model, the extensional model, where you're working with complexity through the program rather than through any specific topic or point in that topic. That would be closest to the SHES pedagogical mindset, but it would require a fairly decent number of holistic systems faculty, and employers may not understand or recognize the approach being taken. Therefore, once again, if you're moving toward a SHES style perspective on sustainability education, the Roundtable recognizes that the diamond or hourglass program designs are probably the most functional for the time being. They both provide both a focus and a broader perspective, and so can be more practical under existing conditions both in academia and the workforce. My program, for example, was designed as an hourglass program, and the idea is that the students coming out have both specific tools relative to environmental science that they can utilize, but they also have a very broad perspective on how those tools can be utilized and for what purpose. relatively practical. And then on the larger scale, if you're taking a look at the specific programs, if you're dealing with the traditional silo program designs, the Roundtable feels that there's simply an integration barrier there. You're not going to be able to get toward that systems interaction complexity type of perspective that is central to the SHES approach. There are digital program designs where you learn a number of different disciplinary perspectives and then start to see how they overlap, and you get collections of those in order to work towards something that is sort of interdisciplinary or supradisciplinary. The extent to which any student reaches that point is dependent on the extent to which the student can themselves figure out the connections between the different things that they're learning separately. Once again, pie in the sky wonderful would be that analog program design where you are constantly dealing with a systems orientation and are building complexity over time. So that would be the most direct way to move toward a SHES approach. But again, it requires faculty and resources that may not be available or may not be ready for such a direct approach. The pragmatic combination program is therefore something that the SHES Roundtable worked out. In essence, a blending of disciplinary and more holistic courses. This blending moves on over time, so you're learning both specific viewpoints and more general things. I tend to think of the narrower courses as tools courses, I used the term before, and the broader courses as context courses. So you learn how those tools can be utilized within a context with other tools that you have learned in order to address something of larger scale. And this mix is likely to be easier to develop relatively quickly if you have access to at least one or two systems-oriented faculty. It would certainly be easier to promote. And by assembling these things, you can provide what we think of as sort of a quasi-holistic endpoint. Often these programs have a capstone project which is more holistic and goal-oriented. But the point is, you can get to something that's sort of kind of like what you would reach in the analog approach. The faculty can help students to piece the things together, but it gives graduates multiple pathways to future careers or continuing education. They have specific tools that they can utilize. They have broader problem-solving skills that they can utilize, and students can then use or trade off on either one of those. They can hand, say, some employer some specific tools that they can use well, like GIS, but they will have a much broader view of how they can apply these things for that particular employer. Vice versa also works. So the pragmatic combination is probably the functional approach right now with what you have, what most institutions and programs have available. So there are ways to move toward a SHES style of sustainability education, depending on where you happen to be starting from. We have to, though, pay some close attention to institutional support and recognition, because it is very important. Current interdisciplinary programs, there are a lot of issues that have been uncovered by a number of studies. There has been an enormous expansion in demand for interdisciplinary programs of all stripes, but there's been a lack of standards for their management, including such basic features as where to put the program and operate it within the institution, how to handle program and tenure issues, and where you're going to place the faculty that you're needed for the more systems-oriented parts of your approach. If you combine that with the institutional pressures from legislatures, trustees, and the public requiring shifts in administrative load and financial resources, more emphasis on corporate job training, it's not surprising that interdisciplinary programs routinely struggle for recognition and resources, despite the important issues they can address. So many of the programs that have been created that are interdisciplinary or higher order, the data shows that they've been created largely on the margins of the traditional administrative structure of a university. And arguably, relatively few existing programs have the same administrative legitimacy as traditional disciplinary units. There are some models. Unity College, Steve Mulkey, who could not be with us today, was the president of that institution. That institution, in essence, utilized sustainability as its driving factor across the entire institution. And all of what used to be their core departments and the like focused on their ability to interact with each other in order to take this on. And that approach did bring the institution from a relatively quiet one where economics was becoming a problem to something more stable today. Small institutions can do this. They can, in essence, draw on their flexibility. There are many larger institution trials, some of which have been quite successful. Arizona State School of Sustainability appears to be a very successful effort, one where they created an entire school in order to take on these higher order approaches. And that appears to be important. Many of the other larger institutions, trials that appear to be gaining momentum and going places, they have an administrative home for their faculty. They have an administrative home for their promotion and tenure decisions. They, in essence, have some type of control and input over how they're approaching their discipline, where they're going. They are meeting their own particular goals and objectives rather than individual faculty members trying to meet specific disciplinary promotion and tenure standards in distributed departments. There are some larger institution trials that do appear to be somewhat successful, and hopefully these can be utilized and expanded upon. But the fact that the successful ones appear to have administrative homes simply emphasizes the need for transitional administrative structures to move toward a SHES style of sustainability education. You have to be able to include the science and the culture and the humanities and the ethics. It takes a different type of leadership to embrace this particular vision. And the institutions have to be willing to accept some type of fiduciary responsibility for what's going on. Creating a brand new department with a brand new approach and giving them no resources on which to try and build something and then say go really isn't a particularly effective way to try and change some of the more traditional aspects of higher education. So the allocation of resources for SHES support becomes very important. If the administrative structures don't change and the resource allocation is not adjusted, then it's up to the faculty in these new programs or departments to try and fund themselves. And particularly if they're small, if they aren't particularly successful right away, it's very difficult for the program to survive. Recognizing these programs, there are some things that have been popping up. The NAEP, for example, put out early efforts for academic centers of excellence. Some of them still seem to be going well. The CEDD National Census 2004 through 2016 identified a number of institutional types of recognition programs, including the SHES Sustainability Tracking Assessment and Rating System, so STARS. It's rated 373 institutions. There are over 800 participating, over 700 in the US, number from other locations. As Rick brought up, though, these often tend to be focused on institutional operational types of things. For more pedagogical types of support, there are some new things popping up. Kappa Alpha Omicron, the International Honor Society and Interdisciplinary Environmental Science and Studies, the Interdisciplinary Environmental Association operates this. It's just getting going now and is certainly something that could be very useful, particularly for students who, through their work, can't really find a good home among the existing disciplinary honor societies. And for those institutions that move towards SHES, I mean, how do you know? If you move into a program at whatever college or whatever university that's environmental blank or sustainability blank, where blank can be any number of terms, how do you know what kind of approach that program is actually taking, or the types of things that you're going to come out with when you're on the other end of the program? A future SHES Roundtable topic that we will be taking on more seriously soon is the potential for a framework for certification. So that there's some idea of the types of approaches that are used in a program, the types of things that are addressed, the skills that a graduate will have, and what the ultimate goals of the program may be. Assessment and evaluation-based learning outcomes are also useful, and as you can see, we're starting to deal with those as well. We have a set of recommendations that are not context-specific, so that you can use these learning outcomes to evaluate sustainability programs that are focused on agriculture, just as well as you could use them in sustainability programs focused on coastal resource issues. Doesn't matter. And then you have the role of organizations like the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. There are lots of separate little groups and actions and initiatives going on right now that are all going in various types of directions, some of them redoing work that's already been done. It could be really useful for the organization of this field to develop national and even international linkages. A sustainability community of scholars that is national or international in scope would be a very useful thing, particularly internationally, because there are different perspectives out there that are available that we haven't utilized very much, or we haven't tapped into particularly well yet, that could be very valuable. So, of course, this is just a really fast and shallow view of the SHES recommendations coming out of the administrative and assessment part of our work. Within the book, you can look at part 3, chapters 13 through 16 for more detail on these topics. You're certainly free to contact Rick or myself by email to ask us about things, or if you want to get involved in the continuing work of the roundtable. We aren't done. We're going to be meeting again here later in the year and continue our work. Anyone who wishes to contribute is more than welcome to contribute. And as Ira mentioned, if you were interested in part 1 of the webinar series, which is on the background and concepts that are underlying the SHES approach, or part 2, our pedagogy and examples, you can go to the SCC website in order to get those links. So thank you very much. Ira, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Rick, for that great presentation. Today's webinar was indicative of the level of effort and the depth of thinking that has gone into the work of the SHES Roundtable over the last few years. And I'm glad that Sustainability Curriculum Consortium is playing a role in disseminating this information, because it certainly deserves to be widely disseminated and more fully appreciated. And so SCC is looking forward to further and closer collaboration with the SHES Roundtable going forward. I should reply, just for clarity, to some things that both Rick and Mike mentioned at the outset when I indicated that SCC focuses on faculty development and curriculum development and not really on facilities and operations. That was not meant to exclude things like programmatic administration and support and assessment, which figured large in today's webinar. That's squarely within the remit of SCC. What we are not trying to deal with, as other organizations and even other listservs do such a nice job with it, just from earlier today on another listserv, if you wanted to find out from a facilities and operations level what to do with liquid wastes or dining service contracts or even electrical efficiency, there are plenty of other groups that have done a good job with that. And as Mike alluded to, the inertia has really been on the curriculum and faculty development side over the last, let me call it, 7 or 8 years. And it was into that void that we launched Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. We are trying very hard not to duplicate anyone else's efforts, where we don't view ourselves as competing with anyone else. Indeed, SCC is a platform for bringing together those players in the sustainability and higher education space who have useful perspectives and resources to share with their peers. Further, to try to bring everyone together, I have assembled a wonderful advisory council. Michael Reiter is a member of the SCC Advisory Council. As Michael knows, we are just wrapping up an internal review of SCC's activities to date and our anticipated future phases. And among the areas that SCC was committed to looking into from the outset, along with creating a space or a place for teaching faculty to come together on an annual basis, which became our annual faculty conference, another topic was the accreditation and certification issues. So I do look forward to discussing further with Michael how that collaboration might move forward. Again, the 3 webinars have been tremendous from Michael, Rick, Paul, and the rest of the SHES team. I urge you to go back and take a listen to the first two webinars if you missed them. As far as questions and wrapping up for today, with the few minutes we have left, I did want to circle back to Rick, if you're still on the line, Rick, and see if you could say a little bit more about your brief mention of the Middle States accreditation process that your institution underwent utilizing a sustainability framework. If you could describe whether that was something novel from the Middle States Association or that was something that was specifically requested by your institution, or anything else you might be able to share with us about that experience.
Yeah, Ira, it was pretty interesting. ESF requested through Middle States that we do what we call a bridge overview using a thematic review process that would stress sustainability throughout the whole review. So then we sort of matched, we took the criteria for accreditation for the Middle States. They have a whole set of criteria. And then we matched those up with the ASHE criteria. So it actually had a scoring sheet which was cranked into the whole sustainability review process as part of Middle States accreditation. Pretty unique.
Very interesting, and perhaps a good topic for a future SCC SHES webinar. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it is one of the book chapters outlines the whole process in one of our book chapters.
Excellent. Any other questions from those remaining on the line? I don't see anything further in the chat box. I can toss it back, Mike, to you for closing thoughts.
I think it's been a very interesting experience working with the SHES Roundtable. Over 10 years, we've been a very diverse collection of individuals from very diverse starting points, have been hashing through these things, all of these different concepts. And what attracted me to the initial effort, what led me to become one of the founding co-chairs, was that other co-chairs were coming at it from very different perspectives than I was, and that we were bound and determined to start from first principles, that we were going to begin from our understanding of what this particular disciplinary field is, how we would approach it, what it is that we needed in order to understand it. Everything that we developed then over the 10 plus years has all fed back to these first principles. So I think what is very unique about this approach compared to others that I have seen is its coherence. Everything from its goals and visions and missions to the learning outcomes to the pedagogical approaches to the administrative designs and the like are all connected, and they all make sense relative to each other. That's something that I've been particularly happy with as we've worked on, and as we continue to work on in some of these other things like the certification issues and the like. We hope to continue this, and we're trying to bring in more different perspectives as we go along. So other people who want to be a part of it, all you have to do is say so, and we'll tell you where to show up.
Very good, Mike. Thanks again for the presentation today to both of you guys, and I'm looking forward to discussing further collaboration. With that, we're signing off for today, and we'll have the video recording posted within the next couple of days. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.